You're listening to the Nacho Kids Podcast, where we discuss all things step-family related. Real stories, real people, real help. Your hosts are the creators of the Nacho Kids Method and the Nacho Kids Academy Step-Family Coaching Team, Lori and David Sims.
Today, we have the one, the only, Laura Petherbridge, the smart stepmom.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well.
Good. Glad to hear it.
So we've had you on here before.
Yep. It's been a while though.
You've been a stepmom for how many years?
Oh boy. In December, it will be 40 years.
40.
40.
Wow.
And everybody's still alive.
That's amazing.
Meaning I didn't kill anybody.
Right. You're not an orange, so we figured that out.
Yep.
So you started helping stepmoms how long ago?
Let's see. The Smart Stepmom came out in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked in divorce recovery ministry before that. So at least 30 years doing a blend of divorce recovery, single parenting, and then moving more into step families.
Okay. And recently, you have written a book.
I have. Yeah. It's been coming for a while, that book. Yep.
Stepfamilies of the Bible.
Yep.
What made you write this book?
Well, it actually started a number of years ago when this finally came out. I was trying to nail down exactly when the idea first came to me. Mm-hmm. But I know I was at a writers' conference and just sort of got the idea. And I'm going to say either 7 or 8 years ago is right around there. And, when you're at a writer's conference, you're like brainstorming a lot. Your juices are really going. And I just all of a sudden was reading one of the Old Testament families and realized, oh my gosh, what these people are going through is exactly what I deal with my life coaching clients and what I've dealt with in a step family. And so I thought, is it just this family? And so as I started looking then at all those families through that lens, through the step family lens, I just was blown away by how many step families there are in the Bible and how closely the emotions and circumstances that they experienced then thousands of years ago are exactly the same as what we're dealing with today. Obviously, the settings are different, the marriages are different, the culture is different, but the emotions, that's what really got me. The emotions were the same. So there's lots of dynamics that are different from a circumstantial and cultural point of view. Because we have to remember that back in Old Testament days, women were viewed as property. We obviously get married, we fall in love. There's a lot more of that emotion. Not that there isn't any of that there, but women were viewed as property, so they didn't have as many rights or as many identity things. Like those women you'll see over and over again in these families, that oftentimes the woman that's hurting is the woman who can't have a baby.
Right.
Because fertility and giving her husband a son was huge. I mean, huge. It was grounds for divorce. Yeah. So some of that stuff obviously is totally different than today. But again, the emotions around it all are the same.
So, step families today, we have my son's father and I were together. We split up. Now we have David as the stepdad. Was this that type of scenario, or is it more of the multiple marriages that created these, what you're calling step families?
Yes. Well, it's a little bit of both. It can be a little bit of both. Yes, it was, of course, back then, multiple marriages was allowed. and legal.
Mhm.
And most theologians will say the reason why God allowed that was because, number one, women, again, because they were property, if their spouse died or divorced them, they were in bad trouble because they had no way of earning a living or making money. So they would either become destitute, they either had to go back to their family of origin, their mother and father, or brother or sister, or they became prostitutes. That's why a lot of these women you read about in the Old Testament become prostitutes, because that was one of the only ways they could earn any money if they didn't have someone to take them in. So again, you have this financial component in the Old Testament that you do not have today. But it's so, yes, they take more wives, but very often the man has one that he's in love with, or one that is the primary wife, and then we add other wives mostly to have more children,
Mhm.
because that was, you needed workers, kids were viewed as workers. And
My mama
so
had that mentality.
mine too. It was the kitchen, not the barn, but yeah, it's
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
idea. So, so yes, that dynamic. But I'll tell you, those sibling rivalries and that step sibling versus half sibling versus biological kids, all of that is very, very similar from then and today.
Okay, so help me picture this because it's easy for me to picture today, right?
Yep.
So back in the day, and I'm not going to use biblical names because I will mess them up. And
That's okay,
if
because
it's
I get them
not,
confused.
yeah, if it's not Moses or Jesus, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
So I'm in my head, I'm thinking, all right, there's like a tent compound.
Yes.
Okay. And so say David and the girl he loved would be in one tent, and all the other women would be in other tents, kind of with their kids, right?
Yep.
So it would be like, go to your daddy's tent. It's your daddy's weekend.
Yeah. Yes.
But
I'm
they,
picturing King David doing that. Hold on a second.
but really, I think they, and I'm just guessing at this, were more of a family. Like they all worked together, even though the women may not have liked the fact that they weren't number one or number two
Yes.
or whatever, is they all work together.
Right. Right. And again, counterculture today, but just in America, other cultures, this may still be a practice. You in very many of the scenarios in the Old Testament, you see the wife, someone he's married to, and if she can't have children in that day and time, the culture said that her slave, her worker, because people owned slaves back then.
Mhm.
And so her worker, her like maid, handmaiden is what they call
Mhm.
the phrase that they, and who was owned by the wife,
Okay.
she would be given to the husband to have more children. See, more children means more money.
Right. Because of
More,
more work being able to be done.
right. And boys got a dowry. See, when a boy got married, the woman's family had to give a gift called a
Thank you for
dowry.
taking my daughter.
Exactly, for getting the woman out of my house. Um, so no, for releasing the parents of the financial burden.
Right.
And so, yes, and of course, she was viewed as a worker also. So you see things in the Old Testament that, again, are going to feel foreign to us, in particular in the United States, and obviously Europe and other countries where we don't own slaves. But you do have countries today where, that's not terribly unusual. But you see that some of these women, you begin to have compassion for these slave women because they pretty much are there just to produce children.
Where did they come from? I mean,
The slave women?
Yeah, the slave women. How did they become the woman's property? If the woman was property, how did they become theirs?
Yes. Well, and when I say property, I'm not saying she was able to buy or sell, because women couldn't buy or sell.
Right.
So, technically, yes, exactly. She's like running the house.
Okay.
And we see this sometimes in older movies or things like that helps us to relate to that to some degree. But usually what would happen is God's people, the Israelites, what we would say today, Jews, would overtake. They'd be in a war and they would take over a piece of property. They would win a war. And when they won the war, what came with that was not only the land. Normally the men were killed in that they took over, the wars. But the women were then taken on as slaves. Oh. And that's how they would accommodate and accumulate these women who would serve in their household. And they really depended on the man of the household. If he was a good man, these slaves were treated well and, fed and clothed and had children and all of that. The thing we're going to struggle with as Americans is when we hear the word slave, we always think of slavery as in black slavery here in the United States.
Right.
Way back in the Civil War and before. So it's a little different. The dynamics of the whole system was a little bit different, but they did become their property. I mean,
right.
Yeah. And so they usually inherited, when they took over the land, they inherited not only the gold, the silver, the property, but they also inherited some of the women, especially younger childbearing women.
Okay. All right. So
we always think of this as a sexual thing, like, oh, they wanted to have a lot of sex. They wanted to have some more sex.
Well, of course they did. They're men.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that wasn't true, but we have to always keep in the forefront of our mind that the goal with these women was children.
Right.
More kids.
That was that was their business.
Exactly. It was like breeding. I mean, I know that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
And it makes the Old Testament sound terrible, but that was the culture of the day. And it just is what it is.
So are there any stories of, I know the answer to this actually, but I'm not going to say it. So are there any stories where the the wife can't have children? So she tells the handmaiden, all right, you can go sleep with my hubby and have a baby.
Yep.
Does that handmaiden then become like a partner to the man, or does the child become more of like the handmaiden was a surrogate? Make sense?
Right. Yes, that's exactly the way to view it. So one of the most prominent of those examples is Abraham and Sarah. Mm-hmm. And we have to remember, again, sometimes in our modern day culture, it's so hard to wrap our brains around this, but we have to remember that from Abraham, I mean, when I was a kid or when I was a very new Christian, you'd hear a song called Father Abraham, had many sons, had Father Abraham.
Yeah. Abraham.
Exactly.
I am one of them.
And so are you.
So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm.
Exactly. Yep. I forgot the arm parts.
And then it's right foot, left foot. And then I think it's over. Yeah.
Yeah. So and we have to realize that from Abraham and what we're about to talk about, these women and children that came, the top 3 religions in the world came from Abraham.
Really?
So yes. So you have Abraham not being able to have a child with Sarah, his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And God had told them, spoken to them a couple of times and said, I'm going to give you more sons than you can count, almost more than the stars. But it's not happening fast enough. Sarah's not getting pregnant, not getting pregnant, not getting pregnant. So she gets tired of waiting on God, and she's got to have a son. I have to have a son. I won't be valid. I'll be mocked. I'll be ridiculed. My family, it's a disgrace. I've got to have a son. And she says, take my servant. Take Hagar, my servant, and go have a baby with her.
That's what she tells Abraham.
Yep. Now, if Abraham had been listening to God and doing what he's supposed to do, he would have just said, no, God promised us, I'm not doing it. But he didn't. He's probably getting tired of her nagging. So, oh, I did? Okay. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So, Abraham does sleep with Hagar, and she gets pregnant, and she has a son. And so that son, named Ishmael, is from where we get the Muslim faith. The Muslim religion comes down through this child that Abraham has with Hagar.
Okay.
And then Sarah gets pregnant. We can go back to talk to how all that played out. But then Sarah gets pregnant, and they do have a child. And that's Isaac. So Isaac is the chosen child. He's the one that God wanted them to wait for in the first place. And after she has Isaac, guess who starts making fun of little Isaac when he's playing or when he's not running as fast or learning as quickly? Here we get into the modern day stepfamily stuff. So Ishmael is, we're guessing around 10 years old, maybe 8, something like that. And he's making fun of, we can read in scripture that he's making fun of his half brother, Isaac.
Now, is he bullying or is it sibling rivalry?
You really don't know, but we know that Hagar and the boy are teasing and taunting and ridiculing the child. And Mama Bear comes out with fangs, get that woman out of here.
Right.
And so this is where I call it the war of the wives. This is where you are seeing what we would call as the ex-wife and the current wife fighting because they feel that the one set of kids is making fun of the other set of kids. Abraham is trying to defend. We see him very much like a modern day dad, where he is caught right smack dab in the middle between these two women.
Right.
But
his loyalty should be to Sarah. Right?
That's true, except he knows this was Hagar. He and Hagar didn't have an affair.
Right.
This is not something that they did, like, oh, let's go sneak over here and we're in love and let's have an affair. She's the one that said, go sleep with my servant so I can have a son, so I won't be ridiculed anymore.
So then technically her own son was bashing her own son.
Yes. Well, yes, but of course the child has a different mother.
Right.
So if she had never gotten pregnant, she might have embraced Ishmael more as her own, because that would be the descendant. But as soon as she has her own baby, does that sound familiar? As soon as she has that ours baby,
things change.
It all changes. And this Ishmael, who she was once happy to have because he was going to provide, a namesake for Abraham. Now she's seeing him ridicule. And see, we really don't see the fur fly between the two women until both the mother, Hagar, and the son are ridiculing her son.
Right.
And that is where, when I'm reading the Old Testament and the Bible, those are the emotions that are like, whoa, whoa. I mean, that's like living next door to me here.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to do in the book is to take these situations like you and I are describing right now and put aside the cultural differences and just focus on what were the things that needed to overcome. So what I did within this book is I took those emotions that we're talking about here that are universal, that happened then, happen now. Might be a little bit different circumstances, but very similar. And I took each one of those emotions that we struggle with in a step family, and I described not only how did these characters in the Old Testament, how did they overcome them? And how can we overcome them?
Right.
So for, Sarah and Hagar, there is this anger, resentment, just animosity. And so, and at the end of each chapter, I put, what do we learn from this step family? And so I bullet some of the things that we can learn. And then I section, how can this step family help my step family?
Right.
And so then I list some questions like, could we learn how to do this differently? Could we learn, this? Do you find yourself falling into the same spot as Abraham where you feel caught between your current wife and your former wife? And so things like that. Do you see favoritism between the kids? It's all of those. So that's what I do. It's the things that are the common thread and the emotions. And then I show how, because to be honest with you, in the story we're using right now, Abraham and Sarah, both Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar all did things that were mistakes that they shouldn't have done. In a couple of cases where God told them, don't do that. and they went and then did it anyway. What I love about each family is how we see God's grace towards them. That even when they do what he tells them, don't do it. We see him still loving them, showing them a way. Doesn't mean he removes all the consequences.
Right.
Because some of them do, like in King David's story, King David's kids. King David was not a great dad. He was a super king. He was an excellent king, but he was not a good father. And his one son rapes his half sister.
Yeah.
And David does nothing about it. And so we can see that dad, so many stepmoms that contact me, why won't my husband, I'm not saying something as serious as rape, but why won't my husband
take their
step
phone
up? Yeah. And punish his son or set some boundaries or, say no. Why won't he say no? And so what I do is I take those circumstances that may be a little different, but that the dad is still not doing the thing that would bring some peace into the household.
Right. Guilty parent syndrome.
Exactly. And we're not told exactly why David doesn't, but we do know his affair with Bathsheba, and it was an affair. Sometimes people debate that. The affair that he had with her, she had no voice. Bathsheba couldn't say, "Oh yes, I'll go out on a date with you tonight," or "No, I won't." This was the king. He said, "You come." She had to come. She was a woman.
Right.
And so when the death of their child happens, the child they conceive during his adultery, and I think it changes him. You see him very repentant at that point. And so that's what I talk about. What does true repentance look like? If it's either your spouse or a child or your ex or whatever, how do we know what true repentance from somebody in our life looks like?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's where we go with all of this, is all those emotions.
Right. All right. Now I got to backtrack because
Yep.
you said the top 3 religions and you only gave me 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you have Ishmael is where we get the Muslim faith.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac is the Jewish faith. And then through the line of Isaac, all the way down to Joseph and Mary, King David, through King David, we get the Christian faith. Jesus is born in the line of King David. So only 2 sons, but 3 religions.
Right. Yeah.
two sons, 3 religions. So, but all of the 3 major religions come through Father Abraham.
Had many sons.
Had many sons. Very prolific.
Now, I guess I'm trying to with Ishmael. So he was like Sarah's kid, really. But then when she got pregnant, she was probably like, "Oh, I don't need you anymore." So now he was more like a step kid.
Yeah. Now you're Hagar's kid.
Yeah. Yeah. You were my kid before I got pregnant, and now you're Hagar's kid.
Yep. And I don't know about you, Lori, but I've seen that with stepmoms.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, where they feel very close. It's like my own. It's my own child. I don't treat them any differently. I don't think any differently. And then they have their own. And all and you know what? I don't blame those women.
No.
Because you don't know what it feels like to have a child until you have a child.
Right. And you don't understand that biological bond.
Exactly. Yeah, that is an emotion that you cannot describe to somebody.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you can put it out there and you can try, but there is a hardwired bond between a parent and a child, a supernatural bond. I mean, I believe God did that for a purpose. I really, the parent-child bond is the closest human relationship that we have that compares to how God loves us. So when you see a parent will overlook and forgive, this is a common complaint in stepfamilies. A step parent sees what the child is doing wrong and that they're manipulative and they're playing a game and they're, like all this, where the parent, because they're looking at that child through a lens of love, that the first thing they see is, this is my little sweetheart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to believe they would do that.
Right. They would never do that.
Exactly. And so that parent-child bond that is an unconditional love for most people. Now, obviously, we meet parents all the time that don't love their children as they're supposed to. But in the natural, there is a bond between a parent and a child that is unlike anything else. I mean, they'll lay down in front of a train for that kid.
Right.
And because their love, I've heard you, Lori, speak about, the love you have for your son. It's your most tender, and I know, hearing you talk, I can tell that nobody could break that bond.
Right. At my sister's funeral several years ago, I spoke, and one of the things that I said was, y'all were lucky that it wasn't me being God and Jackson being Jesus, because I wouldn't let my son die for your sins. You'd be on your own.
Absolutely. And God knows that. That's why he uses, in Isaiah, there's a scripture that says, can a mother forget the baby at her breast? In other words, could a mother ever let drop a baby that's nursing from her? Is that even? And then he goes on to say, but even if she should, like, even if there is one mother out there that would, even if she should, I will not forget you. So he uses the most connected relationship, the most intense love that we humans can relate to, and says, Can a mother forget the baby at her breast? But even if she should, I won't forget you. So he's saying, even the tightest relationship you can think of
Right.
is a mother with her baby, her infant.
Mhm.
And even that humanness in a bad woman, she could walk away from her baby. But I'll never leave you.
Right.
Even if a human person will do that to you, your God, your creator, I created you in my own image. I'll never leave you.
Mhm.
And so he uses that example, what you're saying right there. The majority of parents that we know would, I mean, the loss of a child, I personally believe, is the worst thing a person could experience. I don't believe there's a pain like it out there. That has not happened to me, but it has happened to my co-author, Ron Deal. And I watched him go through that loss of his child. And I have girlfriends that have lost a child. And so I think God uses that so that we can relate or try to relate to this closeness. And it gives us an illustration of why Sarah comes out fighting with both fists.
Mhm.
Don't you be making fun of my kid.
Yep. Mhm.
So, yeah, and I like to try to say to step parents, because moms and dads do view their children a little differently, not less, not one better than the other. I'm not saying it that way.
Just different.
But yeah, and I love to watch like survival shows. And almost every one of those shows, like where there's an animal, it's a bear. Like I figured out why they use the phrase mama bear when they're trying to describe like a ferocious, because any of those shows, if you see the person is being attacked by a bear and it's relentless,
Mhm.
um, like 9 times out of 10, there will be cubs nearby.
Right.
That they're not in that frame of mind, or that I'm going to kill you because you're a threat to my child.
Mhm.
And so when we see mothers going a little ballistic, before we jump into calling them high conflict or crazy, we really do need to sit back and go, am I doing something that is antagonizing that,
Right.
either as the dad or as the stepmom?
Right.
And that goes the other way around too.
Yep.
But very often the moms will say to me, that home is antagonizing my role as a mother,
Mhm.
and I'm going to fight. You drag me to hell because I am not giving up.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there's lots of that in step families of the Bible.
Well, I'm curious. You said that God told Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar not to do things, and they did anyway. What were those things?
Well, the first one was, he said, don't go looking elsewhere for children. I'm going to provide it for you in my timing.
Mhm. And
But
Abraham
see,
was old.
yeah, yes, they were. Both of them were old. When Sarah gets pregnant, she laughs. When the angel comes and tells her you're gonna have a baby, she laughs at God. And she gets a little bit of criticism for that.
Oh,
But what
yeah.
God's trying to explain to them is, you're looking at this through human eyes. I want you to stop doing that, and I want you to learn to trust me, because I'm in control of everything.
Mhm.
And your human is limited. Your human abilities, your human strength, your human capabilities, your human thinking sees this much, where
Mhm.
I see all of it.
Right.
And so the first thing they did wrong is Abraham, because he was the head of the house. Again, women were property. She had no big say in this. He should have said to his wife, no, God promised us this. I know you're upset. I know you don't like it. I
Mhm.
know you feel ridiculed and small and less than. I love you anyway. We're waiting on God. So that was the first thing.
Mhm.
That was the first thing they did. Um, and then when
Instead, he
Sarah,
was probably like, "Okie dokie."
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, get me out of here. And I do feel badly for the dads that go through that, because it feels like a no win. Like, I
Yeah.
can't win here.
Right.
There's somebody mad at me somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, as we move on, when Sarah behaves so badly towards Hagar, when Hagar and the son Ishmael are making fun of her child,
Mm-hmm.
she just goes ballistic. She goes over the top. And instead of going to Abraham and saying, "Look it, you need to control all, you need to fix that,"
Mm-hmm.
she's like a raging bull, and she's like, "Get that woman out of here." And Abraham does it. He does what he pushes the other wife, the other mother,
Mm-hmm.
and his child out. And we see them out in the desert. They're dying. They're going to die. And an angel comes to her. And that's where we see the first time God reveals himself in the Jewish words El Shaddai. And that means, no, I'm sorry, El Roy, R-O-I, El Roy. And what that means is the God who sees. I'm the God who sees. So an angel comes to, or God speaks to Hagar and says, "Go back home, go back to the home, and I'll change things there for you so it's not as torturous. And your son's going to live," because she assumed she and her son were going to die.
Right.
And he says, "I'm the God who sees you." And we have to remember, Hagar was not raised with the teachings of God.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what faith she is. We don't know what she's been taught to believe. Might be atheist. It might be, we're not privy to that, but we do know she was not a Jew. She was not an Israelite. She was not raised with the God that we know.
Right.
And so for him to speak to her, a non-Jew, and tell her, "Go back and I'm going to provide for you and your son."
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. It shows the all encompassing love of God. And she does go back, and then Ishmael grows.
Yeah. Did anything change?
Not really. That's why you see the two countries still to this day, what we're watching on television today between Palestine and Israel.
Mhm.
That is all the way from Abraham. It can go all the way back to Isaac and Ishmael, all the way down.
So look what the step
Thousands of
families
years.
have done.
Yep. That was all a step family drama. Now, God redeems it over and over and over again. We see him showing grace and mercy and protection and provision over and over for both sons. But it created a turmoil. And of course, the root lesson we should be getting from that is, if we trust God, even if we don't see it, we don't like it, we don't believe it, but if he's shown us something to do, in many ways with this book, because it took me forever to be obedient.
And write the book. You didn't listen either, Laura.
No, I didn't. I kept, I'd go a year or two. I'd write some of it, pull it together, a couple chapters, and I'd get into it while I was working on it. And then I'd be like, no publisher is going to want this. It's too confusing. It's too complicated.
Yeah.
And I'd stop working
you
on
look
it.
at a normal step family, but then you've got people that married 20 other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got
Well,
20 baby mamas.
The family trees are, King David alone, 22 that we know of that are named. Like, seriously, my poor husband, whenever we talk about like Old Testament stuff, or or we watch something on TV that's got like polygamy or a throuple or something like that, something like that comes up on TV, he goes, "One wife is way more than enough."
That's what David says. He's actually over here shaking his head right now.
I think I should be offended, but it's too funny to, because he's right. I'm a lot.
Yeah.
So yes, so trusting God, that was probably, I forgot your question because I'm old. I knew the answer was trust. You asked me
the three things that God told Sarah and Abraham and Hagar not to do, and they did anyway.
well, and in it wasn't so much that God told Sarah not to kick Hagar out. So it was to trust him, number one. Number two, as an Israelite, she should have been treating Hagar with kindness. This woman provided her with a son that she didn't have until God chose to open her womb and give her another baby. And let's go back to, this was all Sarah's idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so so God's not happy with the way Sarah behaves towards Hagar. That's a big no-no. The third thing is Hagar is treating her master badly. She's ridiculing Abraham's son.
Oh.
How often do we see she's ridiculing her husband's son? And how often do we see this in a step family with a step parent who's like, well, your kid can't do this, and your kid's a brat, and your kid's narcissistic, and your kid is going to be a thief. And, we get this antagonism towards the stepchild, whether it's you're a stepdad or a stepmom, and we look down our nose at them. We make fun of them. We wish they would disappear. And so where Hagar is wrong, she's doing the same thing Sarah's doing,
Right.
by being so mean to the kid and ridiculing the mother.
So if Hagar and her son hadn't been picking on Isaac,
Yeah,
they might not have had that problem.
So the moral of the story, really with all three of those people, is if they just would have behaved right and not let their emotions get the most of them, not become overcome with jealousy and rage and anger, if they had learned how to control their emotions and not retaliated, they would not have ended up in all these places. And I don't know about for you, Lori, but in my step family, I just got done telling you, almost 40 years. And can I sit here and say that those emotions don't ever creep up still? You would think by now I would have a handle on all of that. Now, am I like 80% better than I was when I first started at this? Yes, absolutely. Part of that is age, but most of it is because I've worked really hard and prayed really hard for God to teach me how to love, how to respond, how to react, how to let go, how to walk away, how to set a boundary. See, I had to learn all of that.
Yep.
And the consequences that we see, not only the adults, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, but that consequence then floated down to their children. Preach it.
Yep. Preach it.
It's going down to the children. Because, see, the children can feel the tension.
Right.
Between all the adults and the mudslinging and the nasty and the you're the good one, you're the bad one. See, we see that, and the kids are picking up on that. And of course, who is the child going to defend? Their mother.
Right.
So to me, it's just astounding that this all happened thousands of years ago and how close so many of those emotions are. And again, all the moving pieces are slightly different and the cultures are different and the reasons are slightly different, but that the way they felt towards each other, it's the same thing I deal with in a coaching call tomorrow.
Right. Because it's the relationships.
Exactly. And we each want to be loved. See, we each want to be first. It's very hard in a step family when you remarry and you have more children, so you don't deal with this in a biological family. In a biological family, you have a mother and a father, and they have children. The mom and dad come into this love for the child at the same time, even with adoption. See, some people try to say, well, that's that way with adoption. No, with adoption, you go together as a couple and you
make that
get
decision.
A baby. Yes, exactly. This is your baby together. This is not a child that the love of your life had with another person. And that you have to envision them creating this child.
Laura, we didn't have to go there.
That's the truth.
I'm not envisioning that. That's pretty gross.
David, don't let her cut that out. How many times have you heard a stepmom say, I didn't get to be his first baby, watching the baby being born?
Yeah. But
I didn't get that. And they feel so resentful.
And they will never be happy if that's what they keep telling themselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. You know, I know with Jackson, I went through that with, oh, what if his dad takes him to the zoo first?
Yep.
Or whatever it was. And I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter, because if his dad did take him to the zoo and that was his first time going, when I take him, it's my first time being with him at the zoo. So it's how you look at it.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be, I'm second, I'm not enough. And I don't know if the Bible speaks on this. I have a feeling it probably doesn't. But I'm sure that Abraham thought a lot better of Hagar once she had the baby.
I would think so.
And then when Sarah had her baby, all of a sudden, he obviously kicked them out.
Yes. I mean, we know that he loves Sarah, and Hagar was there. We never read like that he was in love with Hagar.
Right.
Like some of the other stories in there, the husbands did love one wife more than another.
Mm-hmm.
We read about that. Even with David and Bathsheba, you see that his marriage with Bathsheba seems much more emotional than many of the other marriages. Even his very first wife, King David, got as really kind of a prize. She was the daughter of King Saul, so he automatically got her when he became the king. And so, you know, there's a lot of emotion that happens between those two too. But you know that the first time Abraham laid his eyes on Isaac, this is my son.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the woman that this baby came through.
Yep. It's the baby from the woman I love.
Yeah. And so and the baby, though, I don't love that woman, or I don't love her anymore, the first baby.
Mm-hmm.
But that was precious because it was the first time I experienced it.
Right. Right.
And, you know, going back to what we said before, you can't explain this to somebody. You can't explain that bond, that connection, that instant love. Like this kid could murder the Pope, and I would love them no matter what they did. I know that's how you feel about Jackson. We've talked about it before.
100%.
There is nothing he could do to make you stop loving him.
Nothing.
Now, you might get mad at him. You might set rules with him. You may kick him out of your house. There may be things that you will do to, you know, if he was a bad kid or doing bad stuff.
But sometimes those things are out of love.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But to just kick him to the curb, you would never do that.
No. And I would never, you know, even though my stepkids are my stepkids, I would never expect David to do that with his kids. Because
exactly.
We have to understand that what we expect for our own kids, we should expect for the stepkids because of our partner's love for them.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't mean, see, we've flipped that around today in society. We have this mantra of you should love those kids exactly as you love your own. Well, if I had $1 for every stepmom and even stepdad, not nearly as many stepdads, but stepmom that said to me, whispered to me, Laura, I don't love my stepkids the same way I love my own. Yeah. I feel terrible. I feel like a worm. I said, who in the world ever told you that? Because it's impossible.
Society.
Yes, I know.
All those books.
You and I don't say that.
No.
It doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean you're not crazy or in love with them. You may think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And if you're a childless stepmom like I am, no biological children, you may have nieces or nephews that you feel a tight bond with that is even different than your stepkids. Mm-hmm. See, I love both my nieces and nephew and my stepkids, but I love them. The emotion is totally different.
Right.
In my nieces, I see my brother. I see things they do that are like my brother or like my father or whatever. My stepkids, they remind me of things I see in my husband, or things they learned, or the ways they're gifted that my family is not gifted. And
Right.
so I love them both and I love them equally, but it's different.
Right.
And so we've got to release that shame from people, that if you have a different emotion, it's not abnormal. Now, if you let that difference turn into doing something cruel,
Yeah.
just like we're witnessing with Sarah and Hagar, that's you can't do that. That's not right.
No, that's not right.
That is wrong. That is a sin. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we don't talk about sin much today, but that's a sin.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a consequence to that if you don't. And that's how Hagar ends up getting kicked out, because she's mocking and making fun of Abraham's wife and child.
Mm-hmm. The woman he loves.
Yes. Yes. So, what I love about this book is that God allows us to see all of these people, his chosen people, warts and all. I mean, we see the good stuff they do and how loyal and faithful they can be in some situations. In other circumstances, we go, what were you thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, that was the stupidest move you could have ever made.
Yeah. And I know that we'll never know, obviously, but you can't help but wonder how differently maybe even the world would be if that wouldn't have happened back then.
Yes, that's a big theological question, and many people ask it. What if
Mm-hmm.
Abraham had listened to God?
Right. So,
Would we not have the war between these two?
yeah. Was that the only child that Abraham and Sarah had?
That is the only one that is listed,
Okay.
that I am aware of. And I certainly am not a theologian. So sometimes once I got the description of what I wanted to use in the book, I
Mhm.
didn't research all there are other step families that I don't
You'd
have.
still be researching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it took me long enough to write the book, but yes, that's the only ones we see right there in the immediate genealogy.
Right.
We have to always remember in the Bible that there may be historical records or things that were written that have never been recovered.
Right.
And so, we're always with King David. I'll go back to him. There's probably tons of family stuff there because every time David was a warrior, he was a king, but he went and accomplished a great deal, and they would conquer these cities who would try to destroy them.
Mhm.
And part of the winnings would be like the queen or the princess of that land.
Okay.
And so, there could be way more kids and people than we have recorded in scripture to know about and study about.
Yeah, because they didn't have ancestry DNA back then.
No, they didn't. But boy, it would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Ancestry.com, not ancestry DNA. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never done the ancestry thing, but somebody had asked me and I said, no, I know where I go back to. It's Jesus.
Yeah. He's my daddy.
Yep. That's all that matters.
It is sort of interesting, especially when you look at Mary and Joseph's genealogy. It is kind of interesting to look and see where the two genealogies, when you trace it all the way to Abraham, through King David. I have friends that are Messianic Jews, and one of the things that caught them by surprise when they were praying about, could this Jesus really be the Messiah? Like, is he who he says he is?
Mhm.
And was that they knew in the Old Testament that it said that the Messiah would be born through the house of David, of King David, the genealogy.
Mhm.
And my one friend that I'm really close with, she said, one day I just thought, how will we know today we would have no way of knowing. If the Messiah came today, we would
Mhm.
have no way of knowing, is he in the house of David? And she said, but we do know Jesus is from the house of David. And that little bit of Jewish training that she had as a child growing up Jewish, it caused her to want to research that more and then pray and say, God, is Jesus really the Messiah that he said he was? And so that's how she came to know Jesus as the Savior, was
Wow.
through that whole genealogy. And there's nothing more powerful than a messianic Jew, a Jewish person that has come to know that Jesus is who he said he is. And
Is that what Sid Roth is?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know a lot about him, but I know that he teaches from a messianic, meaning Messiah, that Jesus as the Messiah. And I love that The Chosen, that we can watch now on these seasons, is helping people to understand a lot of the Jewish history so much better than most of us as little Americans here hundreds of years later. Like, a lot of this stuff doesn't make any sense to us.
Right.
But The Chosen is making it so clear to understand how all of these pieces come together, and how all the prophecies of the Old Testament all came true with Jesus. And so, I love that God speaks to us in ways that he knows will reach us, and explain it to us in a way. Is all we have to do is say, is this the truth? I want to know it. Is it the truth?
Right.
And so yeah, those family histories are really, and some of the things I write about will seem so weird. Like when Jacob loved Rebecca, and he
Oh, I know that one.
ends up with Leah.
Yep.
And I mean, when you read that story of, like, he works for the father. I'll work all these years, I think it was 7 years, and then you give me Rebecca. Well, the older sister is Leah, and the oldest sister has to be married off first, and she's not as attractive. That it does tell us that.
She
Eh,
ugly.
yeah, she doesn't say but ugly, but it says she is weak in the eyes. I don't know exactly what that means, but anyway, she's not the one he loves.
Right.
And we read that, they have the wedding. He wakes up the next morning and he sees that it's Leah and not Rebecca. Now, you're in my mind is going, how in the world could that possibly happen?
Yep.
And we don't understand the culture. The bride had to be covered from head to toe, just like we see in, like, with a burqa or something. Like, you didn't see their hands, you didn't see their face, you didn't see any of that. And they would have gone to the marriage bed in the dark.
Ah.
And so that's why he doesn't know that he got a switcheroo. Call it a bait and switch.
Yeah,
And
really.
when he goes to his father-in-law and says, why did you do this to me? The father says, well, she's the oldest. She had to be married off first. You work another 7 years for me, and I'll give you Rebecca too. Give you a 2-for-1. And so now he's mad at the dad, his father-in-law. Now we bring another person into the picture.
Yeah.
Well, how often in our stepfamily relationships, maybe mom and dad get divorced. Dad's got the kids 50% of the time, or maybe more. And his mother steps in to help her son raise his children.
Yep.
I did that when my brother's wife left. He was raising 2 little girls. They were 3 and 7.
Yep.
I lived around the corner.
That.
I stepped right in. So did my mother. And was I very possessive of those girls when he started dating somebody else? Absolutely. And you better not hurt these kids. And so it's very easy for a mother-in-law or a grandmother-in-law or another woman in the family to not like it when he gets remarried, because she just got pushed out of the picture.
Right.
And so, even though that story is not exactly the same,
Right.
it's an in-law that butted their nose in and did something dishonest. And now we've got resentment and anger And now we've got two sisters, not half sisters, two biological sisters that are waging war against each other.
Yeah. How did Rachel not know that was happening though?
The only thing I can figure, I don't think scripture gives, Leah knew. Leah knew what was, obviously, she knew what was going on. I don't know if it was because, like if he sent, we have to remember again, they were taking care of land and properties, and Laban owned a lot of herds and herds of sheep and goats and, all kinds of stuff. So my guess would be, and these weddings lasted for days. My guess would be is that Rebecca was like sent to go take care of a flock of goats or something for a couple of days.
Did I say Rachel? I said Rachel.
Did I?
You said Rebecca.
Rachel.
Okay.
Rachel. I think I said it wrong earlier.
I said, okay.
And so, but I don't know where she was. And you know what? I've never looked that up. That might, which I really should have, because that's a very good, obvious question. So when we're done here, I'm going to have to look that up because I didn't ask myself.
Did they put her in a dungeon or?
Yeah. Well, I know the scripture doesn't say that. But we don't see her there crying or, anything like that. We only hear about that he wakes up the next morning, that he's thought he married the one he loves, and he wakes up the next morning, and lo and behold, it's the ugly sister.
Yep.
But she's very fertile. And he has many children with her.
But did he end up?
Yes. Yes. And then he works another 7 years, gets the love of his life, Rachel.
So his father-in-law didn't lie that time.
No. And that's where Benjamin and Joseph come from. So Joseph that we read about, and that most people that read the Bible know about Joseph, who his half-siblings tried to kill him because he was the ours baby, the favored. That's where I go in that chapter. He's the favored ours baby. Yep. And Dad makes it very clear that he's the favorite, that Joseph is the prince of the family.
Well, and how could he not be? Because I've got a friend of mine, and I mean, I don't mean it that way, but I've got a friend of mine that she had a child. Her husband had several children. They had one together. And I remember when David and I started dating, and she asked me, she said, if y'all ended up together and got married, do you think you would have a kid? I said, no, I'm not driving a bus. Yeah. That was my response. But she said, please don't. And I said, why? She said, because Jackson will feel left out, and so will his kids. It will create, more than likely, a dynamic to where these other children hurt from it.
Yep.
Not always.
Not always.
Yeah, sometimes the ours child brings everybody together, like our dog did. Our daughter, they all love her. Yeah.
It is. It really can go either way. And it could be some of the kids will embrace the ours baby and some of the kids will not. But in this circumstance, and I go deeply into how the dad treated all of the kids differently. And so there's where we're trying to learn lessons and discover the emotions. But when the half brothers decide we are sick of him being the prince of everything, Dad thinks he's the greatest thing going. He gave him this beautiful coat and a coat of many colors. And we have to remember, dyes back in that day were very expensive. So reds and purples and things like that, very expensive. And that the father gave him this coat. And they take him out. And at first they're going to just kill him. But then they decide to sell him as a slave.
I wanted to sell my sister one time. I still do. I got one of them still up for auction, y'all. 25 cents. 25 cents. I'm kidding.
That is hilarious. And so, but the story of Joseph is so powerful because it's explaining that forgiveness can be found even in that stepfamily scenario, even when your half brothers
Yep.
and half sisters didn't want you.
Right.
So, many people compare the story of Joseph to the story of Jesus, like kind of that it's the Old Testament somewhat similar story to Jesus. Obviously Joseph wasn't the Messiah, but he
Right.
saved all of the people and forgave all of his brothers at the end for what they did to him.
Yep.
And
with,
they live happily ever after.
Yep. Yeah. With rainbows and unicorns.
That's right.
But I do think that it's important. And it's probably one of the most important things that I've learned through our whole 15-year step family journey is being able to see things from the other person's perspective.
Yes.
It's not always easy to do. And I would admit 100% when we were in the thick of things and everything had went to crap pre-Nacho, I didn't think about what the kids went through.
Yeah.
I was worried about myself and my baby.
That's right.
But once I was able to understand a little bit, just a little bit of the shoes that they were wearing, of bouncing back and forth between homes, and, is something negative being said here, something negative being said there, just all of that. You don't realize how hard it is sometimes on the kids and everybody, even David.
Yes.
I didn't think it was that bad on David, but like you mentioned, rock in a hard place.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everybody is suffering a different set of emotions.
Yep.
And if we can step out of our own thoughts and thinking and emotion and learn what the other person is going through. And to be honest with you, Lori, I'm shocked that the longer I do this, the more pushback I get from, in particular, stepmoms. That they don't want to hear. Don't tell me about what the kids are going through. They're little brats. They get everything. They get to do whatever they want to do. They're just being selfish. They're just self-centered. They're just narcissists. And the condemnation, and I get it that their behavior is difficult to deal with. It's destructive. It's hurtful. It's hurting your own children. I get all that. But if you don't discover why they're behaving that way, well, they're just acting that way because their mother taught them to. You got to get past that attitude and go, what can I do to show this child I see you? Just like Hagar out in the middle of the desert. I see you.
Mm-hmm.
I see that you're hurting. I see that this makes you sad and upset.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that that's happening. That was not my goal, not my intention. I didn't create that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can do something to ease that for you, I'm willing to learn what it is. And that may be that I'm just going to step back and let you have time with your parent.
Right.
And, we can't get there unless and until we're willing to put ourselves, in those shoes. And it's hard. It's hard to do.
Yep. And two, this as well as I do, the step parent never wants to think that anything they're doing is causing problems.
That's right.
And I think that's one thing that I've also learned is becoming more self-aware.
Yeah.
Or being more deliberate with my thinking and more just in tune with how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that way, and how not to react from those emotions. Because look at the emotions in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that everybody listening has probably had a time that they flipped out, cut up like cheetah, and they can't remember what started it.
Yep. Was it worth it?
Yep.
It really is. And Lori, you've heard me say this over and over again. Being a stepmom is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, it taught me how to love like Jesus, forgive like Jesus, sacrifice like Jesus, more than any other experience I've ever been through.
Mm-hmm.
I've had other people that have hurt me, and I had to walk through that process. But being a stepmom and doing it in the way that Jesus would have me to do it requires laying it down, laying my sword down, laying it all down at the foot of the cross. Now,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean you roll over and play dead. That doesn't
Right.
mean that I became a doormat. That doesn't
Right.
mean I let them to be rude and disrespectful to me. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But I stopped. I had to go, Laura, do you want to be right? Or do you want to build a bridge to your husband's children?
Right.
And God whispered to me, if you can't do it for the kids, do it for me. Do it for me first, Steve second, and yourself third. Because so when I started doing it first for God, like, okay, I'm gonna do the higher ground here. I'm gonna be the one that surrenders.
I'm going to buy that special toothpaste for little Johnny.
Exactly. Not because I want to, and spending the money is kicking me in every way possible. I'm doing this for my husband.
Right.
And not for the mother, not for the kid necessarily, but and it may never get seen by anyone but God and my husband.
Yep. Yep.
And will that be enough? Will that be enough for me? Will I let that be enough?
Right. Exactly. Well, Laura, I could talk to you forever.
I know, honey. I love you.
I love you too. David's over here tapping on his wrist because he's got a podcast recording coming up.
Yep. Totally okay.
So we're going to have you back because I got more questions about all kind of stuff. But
okay.
Tell people where they can find your book.
They can find it anywhere books are sold. Obviously, Amazon is the easiest. Stepfamilies of the Bible, Timeless Wisdom for Blended Families.
Yep. And they can find you at laurapetherbridge.com, right?
Or the smartstepmom.com. That's usually
right.
A little easier.
Yes. Easier to spell.
Easier to spell. The smartstepmom.com.
All right. Y'all go buy this book, read it, and let Laura know what you think about it.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank
and
you.
David.
Yeah. He said, all right. See you later. Love you. Bye.
Okay, honey. Love you. Bye-bye.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And remember that life is good.
And it really is when you nacho.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nacho Kids Podcast. Find us online at nachokids.com. Until next time, remember, life is good when you nacho.